Okay, we are rolling. We are rolling, brother. Champions of Champions Boxing Talk is back. And welcome back, because this is going to be a good one tonight, ladies and gentlemen. How Manny Pacquiao, or I should say what Manny Pacquiao has to do to be sure of victory over Errol Spence Jr. That fight coming up in August 21st, I think. There is going to be some obvious points made in this video, and some real crucial ones made in this video. But let's just, for the sake of argument, well, I'm going to go at it from two baselines here. I'm going to think about it from a second, Manny in his prime, and Manny as we saw him against Keith Thurman last time out 2 years ago. Now, Manny Pacquiao in his prime v. this version of Errol Spence, or any version of Errol Spence I saw or have seen, is a mismatch. And that is not because Errol Spence is not an elite fighter or a pound-for-pound fighter. It is simply this: styles make fights. Against the prime Manny Pacquiao, Errol Spence does no better than Miguel Cotto or Antonio Margarito. In fact, Errol Spence's feet are a lot less fluent than Miguel Cotto's. And we saw what happened to Miguel Cotto via a prime Manny Pacquiao. Miguel Cotto probably hit harder than Errol Spence. His left hook to the body was as good as any shot to the body in the Errol Spence arsenal. And Antonio Margarito, I know people say Errol Spence is a more technical fighter than Margarito, but Cotto is a more technical fighter than Margarito. What Manny Pacquiao in his prime tends to do is completely scramble the senses of the technical guy. In other words, they're so thrown off by this guy you can't get sparring partners to prepare for. This guy that throws at so many angles, this guy that is so fast, has so much power, so much footwork and speed to work with, and an underestimated boxing IQ. A boxing IQ that is as good as many pure boxers. Right? Now, Manny Pacquiao these days is more of a boxer-puncher than a whirlwind. But nonetheless, even the Manny Pacquiao wrecking machine had a far better boxing IQ than people ever gave him credit for. And that is what defeats an excellent boxer like Miguel Cotto, and would defeat easily Errol Spence if Manny Pacquiao was in his prime. So let's just keep that in mind. And why keep that in mind? The reason is this: I know Manny's no longer in his prime, but they always say an old fighter always has one great night left in him. Who knows? He could, that could be in August, when Manny Pacquiao produces, a, shall we say, going into the sunset performance, where he reminds you, in a mirage performance, of the prime Manny Pacquiao. Now, we could have already seen that in the first 6 rounds against Keith Thurman, but I don't think so. I think had prime Manny Pacquiao been in there with Keith Thurman wouldn't have got out of 6 rounds. Just being honest there. But you see, stylistically, Keith Thurman, and Freddie Roach said that Keith Thurman was a better fighter than Errol Spence. Let's just read into that for a second. I don't actually think he means he's, a better welterweight, currently more significant welterweight, that Errol Spence wouldn't have a good chance against Keith Thurman. I don't think he's downplaying Freddie Roach, Errol Spence's abilities. But you have to look at the styles. Keith Thurman moves more fluid than Errol Spence. His hands are quicker than Errol Spence. Keith Thurman tends to attack you, but he also can box you. There were times, and when he punches, it's not simple 1-2s. Keith Thurman can kind of surprise you and fly into shots. That's what he did pretty much in the second half, the Manny Pacquiao. when Manny was beginning to slow down. Now, let's imagine the Manny Pacquiao we had v Keith Thurman, and he comes into training camp, which I'm presuming is this Manny Pacquiao, right? What does he need to be Errol Spence? Well, a lot of people have touched on this. Stamina. Now, he's 42 years of age. But let's face it, 42 years of age is not 84 years of age. We still see people in their 40s and maybe even far older complete Ironman contests, right? Marathons in wicked times, right? Nearly as fast as their younger counterparts. In fact, the stamina is as good as their younger counterparts because it has to be just to get through the race. So, is it possible that a 42-year-old Manny Pacquiao can have more stamina come August than he did 2 years ago against Keith Thurman? Well, he could. Yes, he could. Because that was the only issue people were pointing out in the Keith Thurman fight. It was excellent, aside from that. And let's remember one thing. Didn't Manny Pacquiao get his second wind in the Keith Thurman fight? His stamina sort of waned from round 7 to 9, but then he came back in the later rounds. He got a second wind. Now, I think Manny Pacquiao v Keith Thurman trained as Manny Pacquiao usually does. I don't think there was anything specific that he chose to do in training camp for Keith Thurman. I think he put his all in, don't get me wrong, but it was a typical Manny Pacquiao training camp. If you look at the footage, you know, he's hitting the heavy bag, he's doing the runs, he's doing the drills, all the usual stuff you see of Manny Pacquiao, and then he fought the fight. In other words, he figured Keith Thurman out, I think, a little bit of what he'd seen, but generally in the ring. With Errol Spence, the training looks more specific to me. You could see uppercuts, Errol's low head, right? You could see Manny hitting the heavy bag, kind of targeting the body. Errol Spence is a very big target, right? Very big guy, but a very big target, right? Manny Pacquiao loves a lot of space to hit. And because Errol Spence is taller than Keith Thurman, and Errol Spence doesn't tend to box in the same way, he's more of a, basically a stallion that comes forward. Manny Pacquiao will have probably more opportunity to hit Errol Spence's body than he did Keith Thurman. Because if you notice the shot that buckled Keith Thurman when he hit Thurman to the body with that left, Manny had to duck down. He ain't going to be having to do much ducking to nail Errol Spence's body. Errol Spence's body is going to be at Manny Pacquiao's head height range. He could throw a jab, basically, and land to Errol Spence's body. He might have to punch up to land out against Errol Spence's head. But if Manny Pacquiao has a great body attack, Errol Spence will start ducking down. And then the head will be available. So stamina is a major key for this fight for Manny Pacquiao. And he can do it. I've noticed the runs are more aggressive. For me, he strategically is training reckless. What do I mean by that? Yes, the clever strategy's there. He's looking for the uppercut. You could see it, right? That low head of Errol Spence. The same thing he did against Lucas Matisse. I noticed that punch was in training camp for that particular fight, right? He is bringing things back to, make his body tougher. The stick work on his body. Because he knows Errol Spence is going to try and aim for those areas, right? Apparently they've been running more hills. Hills increase stamina, right? So Manny Pacquiao and Freddie Roach are aware of these things. I think the focus is on power a lot. He has been hitting the heavy bag slower to me. Keith Thurman said he slowed down, but that could be strategic. Manny Pacquiao knows he's quicker than Errol Spence. Even if he's slightly slower than in the Keith Thurman fight, he's still quicker than Errol Spence. The focus has to be stamina and power, right? Because if he gets Errol Spence's respect, it's game on for Manny Pacquiao because he has faster hands. So, the key to beating Errol Spence, Freddie Roach has talked a lot about in and out, right? But Errol Spence has a long reach. If you do some damage on Errol Spence on the inside and then jump out, he might be able to catch you on the end of one of his punches because his arm reach is significantly longer and can maybe catch a smaller guy going out. However, if he is overwhelmed and if you've got his respect, he may become a little gun shy. What I've noticed is this. When you hit Errol Spence, he does shell up. When Manny Pacquiao lands, this is a strategy which I've been thinking in my mind. When Manny Pacquiao lands, which he's capable of doing, we've seen lesser fighters than Manny Pacquiao land good punches on Errol Spence. And Manny Pacquiao was not only known as a volume puncher, he was known as a very accurate puncher for a volume puncher. There hasn't been much wasted by Manny Pacquiao in recent times anyway. But when he lands, Errol Spence will shell up. Manny Pacquiao then can throw some shots to impress judges and the fans. Even if they're catching gloves, he's outworking Errol. He may get the round. Some of that was the case in the Floyd Mayweather fight. Floyd shelled up and Manny outworked him. He did it very well in particular in 2 of the rounds, round 4 and 6. And that's a Floyd Mayweather with much better, much fleeter-footed than Errol Spence, right? So that is one way to look at it. So, stamina, you've got stamina there, right? That needs to be addressed. When Manny does land, Errol is expected to shell up. If Errol doesn't shell up, here's another option, the hand speed. He can double up punches on Errol Spence. If Errol Spence doesn't shell up, Manny double troubles him. Double left or left and the Manila Ice. I got the name of that right hand punch right. I was calling it the Vanilla Ice. It's actually the Manila Ice. Somebody in the comment section on the last video told me this. Thank you very much. So, Manny Pacquiao has to use... He'll be able to use his feet fantastically if the stamina's there. Right? Here's another thing. One of the worries is ring rust. I'm telling you something. Even though the stamina needs to be worked on, it sounds bizarre, this, but the ring rust may help Manny. Do you know why? He doesn't want to waste energy. I noticed in the Keith Thurman fight, and it's easy talk in hindsight, Manny Pacquiao was giving Keith Thurman a whipping around the ring. It was round after round of Manny Pacquiao looking vintage for at least 4, 5, maybe 6 rounds. But you know what Manny was doing? He was winning the rounds, clearly, but then overdoing it. And getting very excited. If you noticed at the end of rounds, Manny Pacquiao was doing Ali shuffles and all of this stuff, and very energetic. Those rounds are the rounds really that took the steam out of Manny Pacquiao. It wasn't Keith Thurman as such. If against Errol Spence, Manny Pacquiao slowly gets into the fight, but is winning early rounds off the hand speed, then he will only get fitter and sharper as the fight goes on. Hence ring rust coming off. There wasn't ring rust against Keith Thurman. He was like a storm from the off. Once he dropped Keith Thurman, Manny Pacquiao got very excited, right? And at the time, I thought he was going to stop Keith Thurman. But maybe he overextended himself, getting too excited, as I said, doing the shuffles all over the place. He was just electric. Now, Manny Pacquiao of old would have carried that on into the 7th and 8th and finished the job. But against Errol Spence, if there is ring rust, again, this comes back to the IQ. Manny Pacquiao is intelligent enough to know this. If he can nick rounds early against Errol Spence, but not overexert himself, he's going to have more energy to play with as the fight goes on. Right? And when Errol's froze, Manny can beat him to the punch. See, there are advantages, obviously, that people have talked about for Errol Spence. Age being one of them, and it's a big one. We never know when Father Time comes knocking, right? If Manny Pacquiao is anything like Manny Pacquiao, Errol Spence, to me, is kind of made for Manny Pacquiao. If Manny Pacquiao is... If, gravity finally does show up, then this is terrible for Manny Pacquiao, because Errol Spence is the sort of guy that will not let an older fighter survive. He'll be in there just trying to bustle you down like a bull. But Manny Pacquiao, if he is still Manny Pacquiao, loves to be the, shall we say, the matador against the bull. He loves it. In fact, sometimes the matador just throws, the pedal to the metal, and he fought the bull head on because he had every advantage, the speed advantage, the IQ advantage. The only difference was the size. They were the only advantages that the bull had over Manny Pacquiao, the matador. But this matador might not move as well, and age may make him more static for the bull to charge over, right? And that's what Errol Spence is. To me, there is no special effects really to Errol Spence. He does things, he does the basics to an elite level, which is still fantastic. But he's not a style that you look at like Muhammad Ali or Lomachenko or Manny Pacquiao where you think, that is unique. Wow. Or Willie Pep or any of the greats from the past. Errol Spence is textbook greatness, if that makes sense. If he becomes great, he is textbook greatness. But we all know Manny Pacquiao rips the textbook up. Because again, all what he does, you can't prepare for. So, this is why Manny Pacquiao is still a problem for Errol Spence, in my opinion. A big problem. In fact, looking at Manny Pacquiao in training, I'm favouring Manny Pacquiao to beat Errol Spence. And this is not hyperbole either. Right? Errol Spence is looking ripped in training camp. But this is a styles match. Errol Spence is looking terrific in terms of his physique. But this is a style matchup. He's not going to be quicker than Manny Pacquiao because of more sit-ups. He's not going to become quicker than Manny Pacquiao because of more sparring, because you can't get many sparring partners or any to imitate Manny Pacquiao's style. He's going to be confused early on. And Manny can surprise him early on. But again, if he doesn't waste too much energy, he can surprise him late as well. Errol Spence might suspect that the storm will blow out with Manny Pacquiao as the fight goes on. Manny's pacing is important with the stamina in this fight. That is the key. And if Manny Pacquiao is not struggling by round 8 with the intensity of the fight, psychologically, Errol Spence is going to think, what on earth is going on? This guy is 42. Yet he's as fit as I am, if not fitter. And the build-up is a crescendo. It's like a football match. When Manny Pacquiao did the equivalent against Keith Thurman, he scored the early goal, and the crowd was electric. But then the second half was more, competitive, and the crowd went quiet. Remember Manchester United's old games, where they make a decent start, but then the other team might equalise. And then, the last 15 minutes, they'd start to up the pace, and the other team didn't know what to do. They were like, whoa, we thought we took the steam out of these boys, but they're getting stronger. And you know what happened? As the night got later, the crowd got wilder, right? You could just see that United were about to suck the ball into the back of the net as the games got nearer to the 90-minute mark, right? And inevitably it happened because we conserved so much in the early and middle stages that we could gamble in the last 15 minutes. Alex Ferguson was a master at that. I think Manny Pacquiao has the same opportunity here to nick early rounds with his hand speed, his in and out style, his ability to hit Errol Spence and maybe slow Errol Spence down. There's a lot to be hit there. Surprising him with a sharp uppercut when Errol Spence is close and leans that head low. Right? But methodically doing that early on. And then, in the getting towards the championship rounds, Manny Pacquiao proving I can up the pace. The crowd then will go absolutely wild, I'm telling you. And Manny Pacquiao will get his second and third wind with that method. But you know something? I think Manny's doing this. I think Manny is actually doing this. What I am seeing him do, he looks more strategic. He looks more to be a student in this training camp than he was in the Furman camp. And yes, granted, maybe a 42-year-old can never be a 32-year-old. That is a given. That is just nature. That's gravity. But a 42-year-old can be actually fitter than a 40-year-old. You know, that is still possible. And it's muscle memory as well. Let's not forget that. How he beats Errol Spence is to be Manny Pacquiao, obviously, with the strategies that I've mentioned, and mixing it all together in a blend, right? Pacing is important in this fight. He knows he can beat Errol Spence to the punch. Everybody's talking about Errol Spence's jab. But here's the thing. There were rounds against Floyd Mayweather, and Errol Spence's jab, it may be heavier than Floyd's, but it's not as accurate. There were rounds in the Floyd Mayweather fight where Manny used the length of Floyd's jab to measure shots. If you look, but when he landed that left hand to Floyd, Floyd had overextended his right jab. Right? There's opportunities, multiple opportunities for Manny to do that in this fight. And because against the smaller guys, Errol Spence's jab seemed to be important. But the other smaller guys Errol Spence has fought don't have the foot speed of Manny Pacquiao. The nearest is Sean Porter. And what did we see in that fight? A real competitive fight which could have gone either way. But Sean Porter's speed and his ability to cover distance and get close to Errol Spence. Now, I know he fights different than Manny Pacquiao, but the feat in a sense of getting to his destination could be, seen as similar, but Manny is better at doing it, right? But his ability to get in and out took Errol Spence's jab away. And he was kind of at the mercy of having no choice but to fight Sean Porter's fight. Now, everybody knows, anybody who is anybody, if you end up fighting Manny Pacquiao's fight, you're going to lose. You are going to lose. Floyd Mayweather, there was a reason why he fought the way he did. He was never going to let that become a Manny Pacquiao fight. Why? Watch the fourth round again. Floyd took that shot well, that left, from Manny Pacquiao. Let Manny Pacquiao land another 2 or 3 of them, though. You're going on the canvas, maybe multiple times. Then you get dragged into a fight. And I've seen Floyd Mayweather as a hunter. And he's not as good at that, shall we say, as many other fighters that I've seen. If he went hunting Manny Pacquiao, he would then end up goosed. He would end up looking like a Christmas turkey, right? You don't vote for Christmas if you're a turkey, let's just say that. But Errol Spence already does things which might give Manny Pacquiao his fight. He comes forward. He comes to fight. And if that jab, it's one thing keeping Mikey Garcia away with a jab. it could be a whole completely different avenue trying to keep Manny Pacquiao away with a jab. I don't know anybody. See, Floyd Mayweather doesn't jab that much. He doesn't. You watch his fights. Juan Manuel Marquez is a very smooth, brutal counterpuncher. But he's not Larry Holmes with a jab. Tell me the last guy you saw control Manny Pacquiao with a jab. Put it in the comments section. The last guy you saw that controlled Manny Pacquiao with a jab. And if you see it on August from Errol Spence, that is a clear sign Manny Pacquiao is coming to the end of the road. Because nobody controls Manny Pacquiao with a jab. Not for a long time. Even Eric Morales, when he won his first fight, had to get into some thunder with a one-handed version of Manny Pacquiao. So, I say it again. Show me the guy that last controlled Manny Pacquiao with a jab. It doesn't happen. Right? Manny Pacquiao knows how to slip a jab. He just has the feet, the movement, the ring coverage, the IQ to do it. He's been there, he's seen all these styles as well. There's nothing Errol Spence can do to surprise Manny Pacquiao in this fight. It will just be a matter of, has time, come to a halt with Manny Pacquiao? Is it finally time to hang up the gloves? But I've got a feeling that he's going to, at the very least, test Errol Spence to the core, right? And I wouldn't be surprised. I am leaning towards Manny Pacquiao to beat Errol Spence. But stamina's the key. Manny Pacquiao doing what Manny Pacquiao does, because it's a stylistic problem for Errol Spence. You know what Manny Pacquiao does. And bodywork. As I've said, Errol's body is huge, and you can buckle him. If some of those body punches are hurting, Errol Spence is going to lean down further, and his head for that left uppercut is there. And, of course, another key factor, I think the Manila Ice Punch is more available because Manny is fighting a southpaw than it has been in his recent fights. The speed thing will take care of itself if Manny is still Manny. He would have to become incredibly slower, beyond all recognition, for Errol Spence to look quicker than him on fight night. Am I underestimating Errol Spence here? I don't think so. Errol Spence has an IQ, but Manny Pacquiao takes some adjusting. It can take some fighters rounds to adjust to Manny Pacquiao. Because again, you're essentially fighting a guy that you can't prepare for. You can't. Errol Spence could not make Lomachenko 154 pounds and spar him for this training camp. It's just not feasible. You can get other guys to try and copy him, but none of them put that blend together as Manny Pacquiao does. You see what I'm saying? So that's my thoughts. That's how the Pac-Man beats Errol Spence in my opinion. You give yours. This is going to be interesting. And this is Champions of Champions Boxing Talk. I'm out, brothers and sisters.